Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now let's start. It is a truth universally acknowledged throughout the ton that a widowed prince in possession of twin terrors, treasures, must be in want of a nanny, and preferably one with nerves of steel, the patience of a saint, and perhaps the magical abilities of a fairy godmother. The Honorable York Kensington, second son of the Duke of Haleshire and bereaved husband of the late Princess Helene of a small but distinguished Germanic principality, had returned to English shores with precisely such a requirement. After the tragic loss of his wife to fever 2 years prior, he had finally succumbed to his mother's endless entreaties to bring his 5-year-old twin sons back to their ancestral home. 15 nannies. Lady Weatherby exclaimed behind her fan to Lady Featherington at Lady Hartwell's spring musicale. 15 in just 3 months. Not one lasted more than a fortnight, and the last poor creature departed after merely 6 hours. I heard, Lady Featherington whispered, her eyes gleaming with the particular brightness that only fresh gossip can inspire, that the little monsters put a garden snake in her bed. A garden snake. Can you imagine? What the assembled matrons could imagine, with alarming clarity, was the handsome figure York Kensington cut as he entered the musicale, his broad shoulders draped in impeccable evening attire, his jaw firm, and his eyes holding that particularly attractive hint of melancholy that made matrimonial-minded mamas practically salivate. A prince, even one with demonic offspring, was still a prince. What they could not imagine was that the woman who would tame both father and sons was already in that very room, seated quietly beside Lady Hartwell's ancient pianoforte, turning pages for the rather mediocre young lady currently torturing Mozart. Amelia Sutton, having reached the advanced age of 26 without securing a husband, had resigned herself to spinsterhood with remarkable good grace. The daughter of a respected scholar with more knowledge than fortune, she had been serving as companion to her godmother, the formidable Dowager Countess of Merivalli, for nearly 3 years. She was neither particularly beautiful nor particularly accomplished, at least by the exacting standards of the ton, but possessed something far rarer, common sense. "Amelia, my dear," the Dowager Countess hissed as the Mozart mercifully concluded, "fetch me my shawl. The draught in here is positively lethal." "Yes, godmother," Amelia replied, rising with the practiced grace of one accustomed to such requests. As she crossed the room, she failed to notice the appreciative glance of York Kensington. But our prince certainly noticed her, particularly when she deftly intercepted a crystal figurine that one of his sons, Lord Frederick, the more mischievous of the pair, had been about to pocket. "I believe," she said, kneeling down to the child's level and speaking in a tone that brooked no argument while somehow remaining perfectly pleasant, "that this belongs to Lady Hartwell. Perhaps you might find more appropriate treasures in your own home, young sir." Frederick, usually armed with a ready retort that had reduced grown governesses to tears, merely blinked. His twin brother, Lord Albert, similarly stunned by this unflustered response to attempted theft, actually took a step backward. "And who?" York Kensington asked, his voice deep and cultured. "Might you be, madam?" Amelia straightened, her simple muslin gown a stark contrast to the elaborate silk confections surrounding her. "Miss Amelia Sutton, sir, companion to the Dowager Countess of Merivalli." "Our apologies for the disruption," he replied with a slight bow that sent ripples of interest through the watching crowd. A prince, apologizing to a companion? Fans fluttered with increasing vigor. "None required," Amelia answered with a curtsy precise enough to satisfy etiquette without a hint of obsequiousness. "Boys will be boys, after all. Though perhaps," she added with a gleam in her eye that caught York quite off guard, "these particular boys might benefit from more engaging pursuits than musicales clearly designed for adult sensibilities." York Kensington's eyebrow rose a fraction. "Are you suggesting, Miss Sutton, that my parenting decisions are somehow lacking?" "Not at all, Your Highness," she replied, the corner of her mouth twitching almost imperceptibly, "merely observing that young gentlemen often behave best when properly challenged." "How fascinating," he drawled, though the usual edge in his voice had softened. "And I suppose you have extensive experience with challenging young gentlemen?" "I have 7 younger brothers, sir," she answered simply. "All survived to adulthood, as did I. Make of that what you will. It was at this precise moment, dear readers, that York Kensington, who had interviewed governesses from the most prestigious families and rejected candidates with recommendations from royalty itself, made a decision that would scandalize half of London and intrigue the other half. 3 days later, Miss Amelia Sutton arrived at Kensington House with a single trunk, the Dowager Countess's reluctant blessing, and absolutely no idea what she had gotten herself into. "The rules are simple," she announced to the twins on her first morning, standing in the nursery as they eyed her with the calculating gaze of experienced nanny tormentors. "I shall respect you as young gentlemen, and you shall respect me as your teacher. I will never lie to you, and I expect the same courtesy. I will answer any question honestly, no matter how impertinent, and I shall expect your attention when I speak. Is that agreeable?" The boys exchanged a look that contained an entire conversation. "What happened to our mother?" Frederick asked bluntly, clearly hoping to disconcert her immediately. Without missing a beat, Amelia sat down on a nearby chair and patted the seats beside her. "A fair question. Sit, and I shall tell you what I know, though your father might have more to add." By the time York Kensington came to check on what he assumed would be the smoking ruins of his nursery and the tearful departure of yet another governess, he found instead his sons seated on either side of Miss Sutton, listening with rapt attention as she explained the basics of how diseases spread. "And that is why we wash our hands before eating and after visiting the necessary," she was saying. "Your mother caught a fever that the doctors couldn't cure, but it wasn't anyone's fault. Sometimes sad things happen even when everyone does everything right." "Father says we mustn't speak of her," Albert said quietly. "Perhaps," Amelia replied gently, "because it hurts him too much. But that doesn't mean you cannot remember her or ask questions about her." York cleared his throat, and all three heads turned. "Your Highness," Amelia said, rising to her feet. The twins, remarkably, did the same. "We were just discussing hygiene and its importance." "I see," York replied, his expression unreadable. "And how do you find your new charges, Miss Sutton?" "Intelligent, curious, and possessed of perfectly normal spirits for boys their age," she answered promptly. "We have agreed upon mutual respect as our foundation and will proceed from there." The twins nodded solemnly, though Frederick couldn't quite suppress the mischievous twinkle in his eye that suggested the battle might not be entirely won. "Indeed," York said dryly. "Well, carry on." As he turned to leave, Frederick called out, "Father, Miss Sutton says we may ask questions about Mother. Is that true?" York froze, his shoulders stiffening beneath his perfectly tailored morning coat. For a moment, the silence in the nursery was absolute. "Miss Sutton," he said finally, his voice tight. "A word in the corridor, if you please." Amelia followed him outside, closing the door behind her with a quiet click. She folded her hands at her waist and waited, her posture straight but not defiant. "You presume much on your first day," York said, his voice low. "Yes," she agreed simply. This straightforward admission caught him off guard. "You cannot possibly understand." "I cannot," she interrupted, a breach of etiquette that would have been shocking in any other circumstance. "I cannot possibly understand your grief, Your Highness. But I do understand children. And while protecting them from pain is natural, allowing them to believe their mother is a forbidden topic will only create confusion and unnecessary mystery." York's jaw tightened. "You overstep." "Perhaps," Amelia conceded. "But I promised them honesty, and I will not begin our relationship with a broken promise." "You would contradict my express wishes?" "I would respectfully suggest that your wishes, in this specific instance, may not best serve your sons." She paused, then added more softly, "Or you." Their eyes locked in silent battle. After a long moment, York exhaled slowly. "You have 3 days, Miss Sutton," he said finally. "If my sons have not reduced you to tears or resignation by then, we shall revisit this conversation." Amelia's lips curved into a smile that transformed her ordinary features into something York found unexpectedly captivating. "Very well, Your Highness. 3 days it is." 3 days became 3 weeks, and 3 weeks became 3 months. The ton buzzed with speculation about how the unremarkable Miss Sutton had succeeded where so many had failed. More interesting still was the gradual transformation of York Kensington himself. He smiled. Lady Penworth reported breathlessly at a card party. actually smiled. When young Frederick recited his Latin verbs without error at Lady Harrington's garden luncheon, I heard, contributed Mrs. Fitzhugh, leaning forward conspiratorially, that he has taken to joining them for breakfast every morning. Every morning, when before he scarcely saw the children except to reprimand them. What the gossips didn't see were the quiet moments. York standing in the nursery doorway, watching Amelia read to his sons with different voices for each character. Amelia finding him in his study late at night, surrounded by papers, but staring at a miniature of his late wife. The first time he laughed, actually laughed, when Amelia recounted how the boys had constructed an elaborate pulley system to deliver notes between their bedrooms after lights out. "You're not angry?" she had asked, surprised. "It demonstrates ingenuity, physics understanding, and cooperation," he replied, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "All qualities I would wish to encourage, though perhaps not at midnight." "They miss you," she said simply, when the laughter faded. York's smile vanished. "I am very busy with affairs of state." "Of course," Amelia replied, standing to leave. "But they are young only once, Your Highness, and they would rather have half an hour of your undivided attention than a day of your distracted presence." These little truths, delivered without judgment but with unwavering conviction, began to chip away at the walls York had built around his heart since Helene's death. "Miss Sutton," he said one evening, finding her in the library after the children were abed, "do you ever consider your own future?" Amelia looked up from her book, surprised by the personal question. "My future, Your Highness? Most women of your age and station would be seeking a husband, not caring for another man's children." "Most women of my age and station," she replied with a wry smile, "would have secured a husband long before now, if that were their destiny. I find I am content with my lot." "Content," he echoed, taking a seat across from her. "A lukewarm word for a life." "Perhaps," she acknowledged, marking her place in her book. "But contentment has its virtues. I have meaningful work, the affection of your sons, sufficient comfort, and books at my disposal. Many have far less." York studied her face in the lamplight. Without the elaborate curls and cosmetics favored by society beauties, there was something refreshingly direct about her countenance. Her eyes, he realized, were not merely brown as he had thought, but flecked with gold. "You never speak of your family," he observed. "You never asked," she countered, then smiled to soften the words. "My father is a professor of natural philosophy at Cambridge. My mother manages our modest household with remarkable efficiency. My 7 brothers are scattered across England in various scholarly and military pursuits." "And how did the daughter of a Cambridge professor become companion to the Dowager Countess?" "My godmother has always had a soft spot for blue stockings," Amelia replied. "When my prospects for matrimony dimmed with age, she offered me a position that would allow me to read extensively and travel occasionally. It seemed preferable to becoming a burden on my parents." York frowned. "You are hardly in your dotage, Miss Sutton." "At 26? In the marriage mart. I am practically ancient," she laughed, the sound warming something long cold within him. "But I made peace with spinsterhood long ago." "A waste," he murmured, almost to himself. Her eyebrows rose. "I beg your pardon." Realizing his impropriety, York stood abruptly. "Forgive me. I have kept you from your reading long enough." As he strode from the library, Amelia stared after him, wondering if she had imagined the flash of something more than employer-employee respect in his eyes. The season reached its height, and invitations poured into Kensington House. To everyone's surprise, York began accepting them, bringing his sons and their governess to select events deemed educational or appropriate. "The Natural History Exhibition," explained Lady Heroic to her circle at the Pembridge Ball, "and then the symphony, and even the botanical gardens. It's as though he's rejoined society, though only for these peculiar outings." What none could fail to notice was how the prince's gaze frequently sought out his son's governess, how he leaned close to hear her observations, how his hand sometimes lingered near, though never inappropriately touching, her elbow or back. "It cannot be," Lady Featherington declared flatly. "A prince and a governess? Impossible." "Stranger things have happened," the Dowager Countess of Merivalli remarked, appearing suddenly beside the gossiping ladies. "And Amelia, while not born to title, comes from excellent scholarly stock." Her grandfather was advisor to the king during the American troubles. This revelation set tongues wagging even faster. Background investigations were discreetly launched. Family trees were scrutinized. And York Kensington, oblivious to the machinations surrounding him, found himself falling deeper under the spell of the woman who had transformed his household from a place of grief to one of laughter. The pivotal moment came, as such moments often do, unexpectedly. During a rare thunderstorm, Amelia found herself comforting not only the twins but their father as well, as the four of them huddled in the nursery while lightning split the sky. Mother was afraid of storms, Albert confided, nestled against Amelia's side. Was she? Amelia asked, stroking his hair. Yes, York confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. She would count between the lightning and thunder to determine how far away the storm was. The boys learned to count with her. Shall we count now? Amelia suggested gently. And so they did, the four of them counting together as the storm gradually moved away. When both boys had finally drifted to sleep, York walked Amelia back to her chambers. You have given them back something I thought lost forever, he said, pausing outside her door. The ability to remember her with joy rather than just pain. Children are remarkably resilient, Amelia replied. They needed permission to keep loving her openly. And what of you, Amelia? He asked, using her given name for the first time. What do you need? The question hung between them, charged with possibility. Amelia looked up at him, her usual composure wavering. Nothing I should ask for, she answered finally, her voice barely above a whisper. York took a step closer. And if I were to offer? Your Highness. York, he corrected. When we are alone, at least, could I be simply York to you? Amelia shook her head, though whether in denial or disbelief was unclear. That would be most improper. Propriety, he said with a hint of his old sardonic smile, has brought me little joy these past years. You, on the other hand. He reached out, slowly enough that she could have stepped away, and touched her cheek with his fingertips. Amelia's breath caught. We cannot, she said, even as she leaned almost imperceptibly into his touch. Cannot, he echoed. Or should not. Both, she whispered. I am your son's governess. And if you were not. Before she could answer, a small voice called out from down the hall. Miss Sutton? I had a bad dream. Reality crashed back. Amelia stepped away from York, straightening her shoulders. Duty calls, she said with a sad smile. This conversation is not finished, York promised, his eyes intense. It must be, she replied, already moving toward the child's voice. For everyone's sake. The following week brought an unexpected complication in the form of Lady Cassandra Darlington, a stunning young widow whose family connections to minor German royalty made her, in the eyes of society, a perfect potential match for York Kensington. She's beautiful, Amelia observed neutrally, watching from the garden as York escorted Lady Darlington through the picture gallery. The twins, engaged in collecting insects for their nature study, paid little attention to the elegant visitor. She's boring, Frederick pronounced with the brutal honesty of childhood. She asked if we enjoy our lessons, then looked frightened when I tried to show her my beetle collection. Not everyone appreciates the wonder of Coleoptera, Amelia replied diplomatically, though her heart lightened at the boy's assessment. Lady Darlington's visit, initially planned for afternoon tea, extended to dinner, and then to breakfast the following day. By the time she departed, the ton was abuzz with speculation about an imminent engagement. Father wouldn't marry her, Albert declared confidently when Amelia attempted to prepare the boys for this possibility. She smells like too many flowers, and she doesn't know anything about anything interesting. Nevertheless, Amelia said carefully, your father may wish to remarry someday, and as princes, you must accept his choice graciously. He should marry you, Frederick stated matter-of-factly, causing Amelia to nearly drop the book she was holding. You're not boring or frightened of beetles. That's hardly a foundation for matrimony, Amelia managed, her cheeks flaming. Now, let us return to our geography lesson. That evening, a note arrived from York requesting Amelia's presence in his study after the children were abed. Her heart pounding, she knocked on his door at the appointed hour. Enter, came his voice. She found him standing by the window, his tall figure silhouetted against the evening sky. He turned as she closed the door behind her. You wish to see me, Your Highness? York, he corrected automatically. And yes, I find myself in need of your counsel. Amelia clasped her hands before her to stop their trembling. Of course, Lady Darlington has expressed interest in becoming better acquainted with me and my sons, he said, watching her face carefully. Society would deem it an excellent match. I'm sure she would make a fine princess, Amelia replied, her voice steady despite the ache in her chest. Would she? York moved closer. The boys seemed to disagree. Children often resist change. And what of their governess? He asked softly. Does she also resist change? Amelia swallowed hard. It is not my place to have opinions on such matters. I disagree, York said, now standing directly before her. In fact, I find your opinion matters to me more than most. Then, as your son's governess, I would say they would adjust to any decision made with their best interests at heart. And as a woman, he pressed, his gaze intent. What would Amelia Sutton, not Miss Sutton the governess, say? The air between them seemed to vibrate with tension. Amelia took a deep breath. As a woman, she said slowly, I would say that marriage should be based on more than societal expectations or political advantage. That your sons deserve a stepmother who loves them for themselves, not as accessories to a title. That you deserve a partner who sees York the man, not just Prince Kensington. York's eyes darkened. And does such a woman exist, do you think? I believe she might, Amelia whispered. Amelia, he said, her name like a caress on his lips. I have not felt truly alive since Helene died. Not until you walked into my home and challenged everything I thought I knew about raising my sons, about grief, about living instead of merely existing. York, she began, but he gently placed a finger against her lips. Let me finish, please. I know the world will say it is impossible. A prince and a governess. But I have been fortunate enough to marry for love once in my life, and I cannot settle for less a second time. Not when I know what is possible. He took her hands in his. I am not asking you now. That would be presumptuous and improper. But I am asking if, should I find the courage to defy convention entirely, there might be hope that you could one day consider me as more than your employer. Tears filled Amelia's eyes. The ton would never accept it. Your position, your son's future. My position is secure, and my sons adore you. As for the ton, he smiled wryly. They will gossip regardless. I would rather give them something worthwhile to discuss. Before Amelia could respond, a commotion erupted in the hallway. The study door burst open to reveal both twins in their nightclothes, accompanied by a flustered maid. I beg pardon, Your Highness. They insisted there was an emergency. There is, Frederick exclaimed. Albert had a nightmare that Miss Sutton was leaving us forever. It was terrible, Albert added, his eyes wide. She was getting on a coach and saying she could never come back. York and Amelia exchanged a look that contained volumes. Then, to everyone's surprise, York knelt down to his son's level. Miss Sutton and I were just discussing something important, he said gently. Something that concerns all of us. Are you sending her away? Frederick demanded, his small face fierce with protective anger. No, York replied, glancing up at Amelia with a question in his eyes. When she gave a tiny nod, his face broke into a smile of such genuine happiness that the maid gasped audibly. In fact, if Miss Sutton agrees, I was rather hoping she might stay with us permanently. As our governess forever? Albert asked hopefully. As something rather more than that, York answered, rising to his feet and taking Amelia's hand. If she'll have us. The season reached its climax at the midsummer ball, where the ton gathered in all its finery to see and be seen. Speculation had reached fever pitch regarding Prince York Kensington's intentions toward Lady Darlington, with many expecting an announcement that very evening. When York arrived with his sons in tow, both impeccably dressed and remarkably well-behaved, the assembled company waited with bated breath for Lady Darlington to make her entrance. Instead, the majordomo announced, Miss Amelia Sutton, accompanied by Professor and Mrs. Sutton and the Dowager Countess of Merivalli. A collective gasp swept through the ballroom as Amelia entered, transformed from governess to vision in a gown of deep blue silk, a gift from the Dowager Countess, who followed with a triumphant smile. Beside her walked an elderly gentleman with kind eyes and a distinguished lady whose resemblance to Amelia was unmistakable. York crossed the room immediately, bowing to Amelia's parents before offering his arm to Amelia herself. As he led her to the center of the ballroom, the crowd parted in stunned silence. "I believe," York announced in a voice that carried to every corner, "that the first dance belongs to me." As the orchestra began to play, he whirled Amelia into a waltz that left no doubt in anyone's mind about the nature of their relationship. The twins, watching from beside their grandparents-to-be, beamed with pride. "Well," Lady Featherington exclaimed, fanning herself vigorously. I always said she had excellent bloodlines," the Dowager Countess remarked smugly. "And more importantly, she has made those boys smile again. And their father, too." Later that night, as the ball reached its conclusion, York led Amelia onto the terrace beneath a canopy of stars. Dropping to one knee before her, he produced a ring set with sapphires that matched her eyes. "Amelia Sutton," he said, his voice husky with emotion, "you have taught me that love can come twice in a lifetime, that grief need not be the end of joy, and that sometimes the most perfect match is the one society least expects. Will you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife, my princess, and mother to my sons?" Amelia, tears shining in her eyes, placed her hands in his. "Yes," she whispered. "With all my heart, yes." And so it was that the governess no one expected to last a day became the princess who lasted a lifetime. The twins grew into fine young men under their stepmother's loving guidance. York found happiness he had thought forever lost, and the ton, after an initial period of shock, decided that perhaps love was, after all, the most fashionable match of all. As Lady Hartwell was heard to remark at the wedding breakfast, "It just goes to show, my dear, that sometimes the most valuable treasure is hiding in plain sight, if one only has the wisdom to recognize it."